May I ask about the ego? What is its function? And also,
Great question.
before I ask that, is it okay that I'm closing my eyes or just in the zone when I'm listening to you more?
Yeah, absolutely. You always have total freedom to keep your eyes open or closed whenever you see fit. You have total freedom over your blinkers.
Amazing.
So let me get a keyword to remember where I was going. Okay, I remember what it was. So it's just about like why people quit, why people give up, um, why your friend that you care about is where he's at potentially. We'll get into that. So the ego that you said, like, what is you like? The question is, what is the ego? What is its function? What is its purpose? That's a great question. These are questions that a lot of people don't always ask. And I love it. Like the deeper, the more, the deeper, the better for me. So, in my experience, research, the ego is a ancient archetypal program. If the mind is a supercomputer, the most advanced supercomputer that ever has or will exist, even with AI, if the mind is a supercomputer, which it is, in my experience, my research findings, all of it. Then there's programs. Well, of course, we can get a program through the subconscious mind through repetition. If we repeat anything enough in the 5 stages of learning, it becomes a program. But the ego, it is a very different program. I'm not going to say a rogue program, but it's just such a different program than any other of the programs because most programs are psychological. And the ego is psychological, but it impacts the spiritual world. So essentially, in my experience, the psychological world can't go into the spiritual world. The spiritual world can go into the psychological world. A lot of times, the ego thinks they can go into the spiritual world. It thinks it can do anything. It's the biggest like BSer, lie teller, deflector. It's the ego is the accuser of its own guilt, so it really blames people. Like you're not listening to me, but a person's really not listening to themselves. Like, I don't like you very much. They don't like something within themselves, and it's not that simple because you have to go deep to do it. But the ego blames, deflects so many things to other people, everything in the outside world. Like if the ego had a emoji, it would be pointing outward. That's really what it would be. Don't look at me, because if you look at me, if you bring awareness to me, then I start to dissolve. But then I'm also going to give a flare. I'm going to test your nervous system to see how much you've developed your ability to experience, accept fear, or reject and release it. Because the closer we get to the ego, then the more fear it goes, and usually the fear of dying. And that's like a big one that the ego, it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf. It's the ego who cried death. Like, don't look at me or don't do this because, and it won't say it directly unless you pin it down with the light, but it will try to deflect and give all this kind of fear. But if you were to just relax your body, breathe deeper and experience that fear, then the ego dissolves. But the ego it's this program that is, if we didn't have an ego, we wouldn't experience duality and we wouldn't really learn all the lessons. The best way I would explain it in this moment would be we are eternal before we take physical form, this life, and we will become non-physical again. Why would we do that? To experience. Can you imagine if you were just eternally love, light, expansiveness, like for eternity? It might be boring after some time. Like if you were only one emotional state forever, it would probably get boring. So we, in a way, come to Earth because there's color, because there's gravity. Like, what is gravity? We don't have gravity where we come from. It's weightless. And essentially, we're formless. But then we can take on a form, and there can be gravity, and we can experience wet and like rain on our skin, and we can have sweat. We can have hot and cold. Like, We can have ice, we can have tea, we can have sweet, we can have sour. We can taste, spoiled foods. Ooh, that's a crazy experience. Um, we can smell roses. Like there's so many different full spectrum of experiences on Earth. Earth is very rare like that. And if people, don't fully believe in that, just look at the next closest planets to us, the next 8 closest planets to us. There's no forms of life that really, really we know. And I say we, and then some people can listen to it like, well, okay, what if it's flat Earth and then this whole thing's a dome and it's a projection? Well, that could be too, but we still can't experience that with vehicles right now that I know of. But anyways, so
Is psychological meaning its function of the mind?
yes, the psychological world contains the mind, thoughts, and internal representations in the ego. Spiritual world contains intuition, insights, which are different than internal representations, and emotions and feelings in the neo. So we can get images, but if we can change it in psychological terms and spiritual NLP terms, if we can change the internal representations, it came from within the mind. If we get an insight which has expansiveness, has light, has this divine presence with it, we can't change the internal representations. Then it's an insight from the source. We can experience it similarly, but if we get down to it, it's just not the same at all. We can change one, we can't change the other. So the mind, or with the ego, it's ideally in a perfect life, it's meant to enter around 2 and maybe dissolve around 21. But that's not like what the culture is. That's not what society, that's not where humanity is right now. It's kind of like there's winter, spring, summer, and fall. Humanity goes through these cycles every 6,500 years. There's different yugas, there's different stages, ages, so to speak. And that's not where humanity's in a huge waking up point, which you can see that. I think it's undeniable for most people that, well, for everyone who's awake, and who are waking up, that people are waking up at a rapid rate. And people can say on one level that, which we said in this last meeting that we had, which was, in my experience, in this time of life, no other time in history has there been more overt divisiveness. But equally, no other time has been overt light. And no other time, more importantly in history, it's easy to transmute that divisiveness. So it's yes, there's more darkness in the world, there's also more light. And it's easier to transmute the darkness than any other time. That's what's also interesting. And the ego is a false self. It will say me, I. It will speak as the individual, and it starts at around 2. It can be a little bit earlier, a little bit later, but terrible 2s is what a lot of people call it. And what is terrible 2s? My baby changed is really what it is. My baby changed. Now my baby's resisting things. Now my baby is his own little person. But it's not always, the best thing. The baby's just pure kind of most babies without drugs, and depends on the parents, but most babies are these pure, for the most part, balls of light. They're really more connected to the source. And then as they grow on, people lose the connection because they lose themselves, because the ego takes over, because they allow it, because they don't have the training for it. And that's what I do, and that's what I share, and that's what I'm here to do. And there are other situations and other places that can. It's just so rare, but a person has to be ready for it and looking for it and cutting through all the other things that doesn't want them to do it. And the ego's purpose is for us to experience a sense of separation from the source. Why? Why do we want to experience the separation from the source? Because if we're eternally the source, that's the only, you can call it oneness. You can call it bliss, you can call it harmony, you can call it union, you can call it all that is, one with all that is. You can frame it mentally a lot of different ways, but there's a presence. The more we talk about it, the more we focus on it, the more we can actually experience that. You can call beyond the mind that which created the mind. This divine presence, eternal light. You can call it a lot of different things from the mind. The interesting thing with the mind is once we label things, sometimes we experience the label instead of the direct experience ourselves. So sometimes calling the label is one thing, but then removing the label and going into direct experience is really where it's at for experiential experiences. But the mind is a computer, and it will really do what it's told, so to speak. But the ego is a program it's an imposter. It is an imposter. It is not our true selves. Most people operate from the ego. And the ego is the program that identifies as the operator and the owner of the mind and of the body and of the person and of the life. And it's simply not true.